Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into the incredible story of how the absolutely glorious art of the Italian Renaissance, well, it accidentally kicked off a massive religious revolution, and in a bizarre twist of fate, that war ended up creating a totally new and super powerful style of art.
So, how on earth did a painting help tear the Christian world apart? Well, to figure that out, we've got to go back, way back. We're talking 15th century Florence, and you have to understand this wasn't just any city. It was the wealthy, beating heart of the Italian Renaissance. It was a place where money, art, and faith were on a collision course, and things were about to get explosive.
All right, section 1. Florence, a Renaissance powerhouse. We're talking about a city where money was literally painting the town. Back in the 1400s, Florence was an absolute titan both culturally and financially. But really, its story, it was all shaped by one single, unbelievably powerful family.
And that family was, of course, the Medici. Look, these guys weren't just bankers, they were financial revolutionaries. I mean, they changed the whole game with innovations like double-entry bookkeeping. They got so rich, so powerful, that by 1434, let's be real, they were running the show in Florence. And what do you do with that kind of money? Well, they became some of the greatest art patrons in history, pouring cash into masterpieces and transforming their city into a cultural juggernaut.
Okay, so let's get into how art, money, and power all tangled together. Because you have to understand, in Renaissance Florence, commissioning a big, fancy painting wasn't just about having something nice to look at. No. It was a statement. It was a power move. It was the ultimate status symbol, the best way to broadcast your wealth, your sophistication, and your influence to the entire world. It was basically a propaganda machine. And what's really fascinating is how this changed the role of the artist. Think about it. In the Middle Ages, artists were basically seen as craftsmen, like a really good carpenter. The value of a piece was all about the expensive stuff in it, the gold leaf, the pricey blue pigments. But in the Renaissance, everything flipped. Suddenly, the artists themselves were seen as gifted intellectuals, as geniuses. It wasn't about the cost of the paint anymore. It was all about the skill and the vision of the person holding the brush. And nobody, I mean nobody, played this game better than the Medici. They had a whole playbook for it. Step 1, take your giant pile of banking money and commission some huge public art. Step 2, hire the biggest names of the day. We're talking Leonardo, Michelangelo, Botticelli. Then, and this is the really clever part, you have them sneak your family's portraits and symbols right into these big religious scenes. It was brilliant. It made them look super pious and important, solidifying their power. It was pure, sophisticated propaganda. So that brings us to the next chapter, a challenge to the church. Because as powerful as the Medici were, they weren't the only ones splashing cash on art. The biggest patron of them all, the Catholic Church, had even bigger, way more expensive plans. And how they decided to pay for it all? Well, that's what changed everything. I mean, think about the sheer scale of these projects. We're talking about Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling, the complete rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. These were mind-bogglingly ambitious, and they came with an absolutely astronomical price tag. So the big question was, where was all that cash going to come from?
Well, the church had a few fundraising strategies. They taxed Christians across Europe, they took big donations from the rich, but then there was the most controversial method of all, selling something called indulgences. And the idea was simple, if a bit shocking. You could pay the church some cash, and in return you'd get a piece of paper that promised to reduce your time or a loved one's time in purgatory. Yeah, the idea that you could literally buy your way into heaven, it struck a lot of people as outrageously corrupt.
And that simmering anger, it finally hit a boiling point in 1517. That's when a German theologian named Martin Luther famously published his 95 Theses. He was directly calling out the sale of indulgences, and this single act, well, it lit the fuse. It ignited the Protestant Reformation and basically ripped the Christian world apart. So the church is facing this historic crisis, right? It's losing its grip. But it did not just sit back and watch. Oh no. It launched a powerful counteroffensive. It was a massive movement to fight back, known as the Counter-Reformation. So what exactly was the Counter-Reformation? It was the church's official, full-blown response to the Protestants, a period of religious and artistic revival meant to reassert Catholic power. An essential piece of this new strategy, something they hammered out at the famous Council of Trent, was a whole new plan for religious art. Essentially, art was about to become a weapon.
And you can see the new rules for art right here. The Council of Trent laid it all out. First, art had to be crystal clear, simple stories that anyone, even someone who couldn't read, could understand. It also had to be realistic, making these religious figures feel real and relatable. But the big one? It had to have a huge emotional appeal. It needed to grab you, inspire devotion, and just overwhelm you with the power and glory of the Catholic faith.
And this new mandate for art, this new mission, it sparked a whole new style, something completely revolutionary. It was dramatic, it was dynamic, it was spectacular. It was the Baroque. And the shift was just, wow, it was dramatic. If you think of the High Renaissance as being all about calm, harmony, and balance, very intellectual, the Baroque was the total opposite. It was an explosion of intense drama and emotion. It wasn't just there to look pretty. It was designed to be an overwhelming spiritual spectacle, a full-on sensory experience.
And you had these absolute masters of the style, guys like Caravaggio and Bernini. They used all these amazing new tools. You've got chiaroscuro, which is that super dramatic, high-contrast use of light and dark. You've got these figures captured in moments of raw, intense emotion, sometimes even gritty and uncomfortable. The compositions are all about movement and energy. It was all about creating an immersive experience that just screamed, "This is the power of our faith."
So, when you step back, you can see the dominoes falling one right after the other. It all starts in Florence, right? The Renaissance makes art the ultimate symbol of power. This pushes the church to fund these massive, crazy expensive projects. To pay for them, they sell indulgences. That, in turn, provokes Martin Luther and helps kick off the Protestant Reformation. And finally, the church fights back with the Counter-Reformation, turning art into a weapon and creating the dramatic Baroque style. It's a perfect chain reaction.
And that leaves us with this really tricky, fascinating question, doesn't it? When you stand there and look at something as sublimely beautiful as a masterpiece, does it, or should it, matter how it got made? Can the beauty of the art forgive the questionable methods used to pay for it? It's something to think about, for sure. A real reminder of that timeless and often complicated link between art, money, and morality.